So you sent away for a DNA test and you received it, you filled up the vial with spit or you scraped the cells off your cheek, depending on which DNA test you got. You've waited to 4 to 6 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks and you've gotten the results. You just got them email and you're wondering what to do with them now. What do they all mean? Those are good questions. And I'm Brian Nash from How We Got Here Genealogy. And in this video, I'm going to explain all of that to you.
Top of the morning to you, ladies. My name is Jacksepticeye, and you ready to travel back in time to figure out where did Jack actually come from? What's his ethnicity? What's he actually made up of? Well, look no further than the Ancestry DNA kit. But we can see my results. Oh! Thousands of years ago, ethnicity estimate. I'm 62% Irish, and I'm 34% Great Britain. Oh no!
Today I'm doing something that I've wanted to do for a really, really long time, which is take a DNA test and see my results. I was gonna say, like, if I was to guess what I am, I think it would give me some combination of like African Arab descent with maybe a hint of Asian, like 20%. I don't know, just guessing. Dude, this is so spot on. That's freaky. I'm 85% North African and Arabian, which, like, yeah.
How's it going, bros? It's me. Welcome. So, I did a DNA test. That's right. And I finally got the results in my email. Well, what I want to see is my ancestry. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Oh. What? 100% Scandinavian. What does that mean?
If you're like these YouTubers, I mean, we've all seen the videos. I've even done one myself. You're interested in finding out what your heritage is. What does your DNA say? What people groups do you belong to? But as a genealogist, there's so much more. I'm going to show you that a little later. But let's first explain how, when you do these tests, they figure out your heritage. In order to understand how they get your ethnicity results or your ethnic origins, you have to understand a little bit about the way DNA works. So in order to understand this, I'm going to use what's called a fan chart. And this is one that's provided through the MyHeritage software program that I use. And it simply starts with me, and it goes out to my generations, and it splits it off. In this case, we're really going to start simple. We're going to go to my great-grandparents. So I'm going to show you with my great-grandparents there. So how it works is that each generation, your number of people at that level of the generation doubles. We all know that. So you have yourself in generation 1. There's just one of you. In generation 2, you have 2 grandparents. Generation 3, you have 4 grandparents. And generation 4, you have 8 great-grandparents. So let's look. Right now, I'm one generation. The DNA I have is 100% me. But it's also 50% from my father and 50% from my mother. And that makes sense. Now, my father gets 50% from his mother and 50% from his father. So, from my grandparents, I would have 25%. Because my dad would have 50% from each, and I would have half of what he's gotten from each of those. Or rather, he's made up of 50% and 50%, so should be 25 and 25. And likewise, you go to your great-grandparents, and you would have 12.5%, because that's half of 25. So while you double the generations, the people in the generation each time you go down, you actually half the amount of DNA. So this is just another way of expressing the ideal, if we lived in a perfect world, how it would work. So I'm going to actually use my wife for this example, because it's a really easy way to explain it, because she has 2 great-grandparents that are both from Finland. This is on her mother's side. So if this was my wife, this is her mother's family, this is her father's family. So we're just going to look at this side here. We're going to, if her great-grandparents are both from Finland, and DNA can only go back so far, and I'll sort of demonstrate why in a little bit, as far as it getting any accurate results. But as far as it should be able to go back through generations, their families can trace that they had stayed in Finland for enough generations that there shouldn't be anything else in there. So my wife should be 25% Finnish. So that would be represented by this little corner here, if it was perfect. But unfortunately, DNA is not perfect. Each person up here is 100% of their own DNA. So these are both 100% Finnish. So that works great. Now what happens is their daughter, my wife's grandmother, she's going to get 50% and 50%. She was alive when we did a DNA test. She should show 100% Finnish, because her parents are both 100% Finnish. Now we have my wife's mother, and over here we have my wife's father. So my wife's mother, now she gets 50% from her mother, who is 100% Finnish, and she gets 50% of her from her father. If she did a DNA test, she probably would show 50% Finnish. She should, unless there's some anomalies back here. Though the problem is my wife. Not that my wife's a problem, but she gets 50% of DNA from her father and 50% from her mother. So she's going to get, out of this, like I said, her mother's 50% Finnish, 50% from the British Isles. So my wife is going to inherit 50% of this DNA. But she doesn't, when she does that, and she takes, if her mother has 100% of DNA there, she doesn't just take half of her mother's mother and half of her mother's father. She takes it as a whole. So she takes 50% of that whole DNA, and it's random. So she could actually have more, or she can have less. Now there's a range that you would expect, because chances are she's not going to take her 50% all from her mother's side. So you would expect there would always be some mixture of the others. There's several thousand parts where they compare, parts of DNA that you would inherit that they can say are from one ethnicity or another. She could be anywhere from 50% Finnish to no percentage from her mother's side, and be almost all from her mother's father's side. But we know that's sort of how it works, and that's what they're doing is when they take you as a whole, and they're comparing these pieces of DNA with samples they have from other places and people who identify from other ethnic origins. So we're back to my family, and what we have here is the same chart, but now it's going out to 10 generations. But what are 10 generations, and what do they look like as far as your DNA? With 10 generations, you do the same thing. For every generation, you double the number of people that are part of it. DNA, you go by half. So by the time you're your 10th generation, you're at your 7th great grandparents, you have 0.1953. So less than 0.2% of DNA would you share from any person at that 10th generation. So you're not likely going to find that in your DNA test unless it was carried in large amounts through generation to generation. Again, it is possible, but it's not very likely. So with most DNA tests, you're really, to be safe, you're looking around between your 7th and 8th generation. You know, if you had 1% DNA, that doesn't necessarily mean that comes from a 5th or a 4th great grandparent. It could come from up higher. There's all kinds of combinations there, and as I showed you, it's not a perfect science. These are just sort of the amounts that you would expect to see if everything was being equal. So what they do to get your ethnic matches is very similar to the type of chart that I quickly made to show how much percentage you have on your great grandparents. What they do is they take your DNA and they have control groups of people they know that are from specific ethnic origin. They take from people that are still in that area and that have long traced histories in that area. As I was showing you how you can only go back so many generations before it's hard to actually get a reading and to be distinct. Which is one of the reasons you don't see DNA tests reporting that you're a certain percentage Canadian or a certain percentage American or Australian. Any place where there was immigration, there's not a unique DNA matching group that you can say because they were melting pots that came from so many places. Which is one of the reasons when you're looking even at some European countries, it's really hard to get an exact match of German ancestry because Germany exists as it does now. It's existed in several incarnations in the 20th century, and prior to that it was part of Prussia. There's Germanic people, so it's really hard, and the same as French. There's a few places in Europe where they've had people that have been transitioning and for years from place to place, so they might not be in France now, but their ancestors were part of France, their area is part of France. So there's a lot of things that they take into account when they try to do your DNA ethnic estimates. Also, each DNA company has their own control groups that they use and their own methodology to try to determine that. When they look at the DNA, they're trying to maybe match different parts. That's why you'll get DNA matches that differ. So I'm going to show you the 2 DNA tests that I did from different testing companies, and just to show you how different the results can be based on their control groups. So the first one that I did was from MyHeritage. MyHeritage is actually my preferred location that I like to do, but this is what they gave me. They gave me 78.7% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. I know for my own family I should be almost 50-50 just based on my own family tree. But I had these other things in here: Balkan, Finnish, and Greek. I have no ideas where they got them from, and it wouldn't be really too far distant because we're still looking, between 5 and 10% roughly for each of those. So they should be in the range that could have been a, if I go back to my grandparents' chart, that would be between my 2nd and my 3rd great-grandfather. This would be just under my great-grandparents, so this could be, a great-grandparent that's only shown a little bit. These 2 here would both be in the range of my 3rd to 3rd or 2nd great-grandparent, or 2 4th great-grandparents. Anyways, again, I don't necessarily see that. When I did my second test, which was from Ancestry, I showed up with 58% Scottish and 42% Irish. So this here is actually pretty good. I really should have 50% Irish from and 50% Scottish because my dad's side is all Irish. My mom's side is also Scottish. That being said, with Ireland, there is a group of people in Ireland who do have Scottish descendants. It would be throughout Ireland. You'd have Scottish people. You'd see Scottish names. In fact, I have a whole video from a podcast I did where I interviewed an author and we talked about his book about the Ulster Scots of Canada. So it is interesting that in this one, I do have the Balkan, Finnish, and Greek though. They come from different testing pools, and there might have been people that have identified their generations as being Finnish, Balkan, or Greek, and I just matched certain areas with them. The interesting thing is when I looked at a lot of these people, that they definitely are from my Scottish or Irish side of the family. Most of the ones I've looked at, they have Scottish names or Irish names. There's something there with their population that possibly had migrated, or there had been some mix at some point, and those people identified there. But just to show that my heritage is actually very consistent, my heritage, and the reason I really like it, is it lets you actually upload your DNA information from another DNA test you did. So I had my Ancestry test here, and I decided to let's load that up into my heritage. So when I did it in my heritage, the same test, I came up as 82% Irish, Scottish, and Welsh. I still had Balkan, I still had Finnish, and I had Greek and Southern Italian. You'll also notice there's a few different communities of Irish, Scottish people that are not here, that are in this test. You know, you'd think the same population, I should have the same results, but this was a different DNA sample, and they thinks that we're being tested for an ancestry that I transferred over. They might be different segments, and I didn't have matches on the same segments. It's really interesting, though, but that's sort of how they do your ethnicity. It's reasons you will see differences. They use different populations to test. There's different parts of your DNA that they're testing and matching against their control groups as well. Is it reliable? Is my heritage reliable when I know that should be close to 50-50 Scottish-Irish? I would say yes, but what's happening there is I'm matching up with Scottish people who either identify part of their heritage as being those other ones. My heritage is my favorite. I like the tools on the site. I do recommend it if you have the time, if you have the money, do 2 tests from different places, because you will get different results based on who does it. There's also a lot of other resources you can use. Really, the simple part of how they get your ethnic origins, if you are one of those people who got your DNA test just to find out what ethnicity you are and you hadn't really thought about doing your family tree and you're intrigued now, might I suggest you start with this video here on starting your family tree. It will help you start your family tree right away in less than 10 minutes.